Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik, Skopil, John Evans on the show today. It's a Thursday. I don't know, 6 weeks, 5 weeks now till spring football, and it's a good time to start looking ahead towards where Oregon currently sits on the offensive side of the football. We'll do defense probably next week. We're going to look back a little bit on the 2025 season while also glancing ahead to just kind of our first thoughts now that the roster is finalized. Like they could still add in theory some players from the portal. We'll see if there's some really late ads from a high school perspective, because technically there's a high school signing day in about 2 weeks. But Dan Lanning is under his watch really hasn't added a ton of high school guys this late in the process. So maybe it's a portal guy or two, but it feels like the roster is pretty close to being set. So let's start at quarterback, Erik. Like this is the obvious one, the most important position. Dante Moore. Going into the 2025 season, we all kind of viewed him as a hopeful one of best quarterbacks in the country. Like we kind of felt like the offense would position himself to be in that way. We kind of felt like he had the skill set to do it. He just kind of had to go out and do it. And I think he exceeded expectations. Do we want to agree with that, or do we think he met expectations?
I think I mean, I guess it depends on how realistic and reasonable your expectations were to begin with, right? Like, if you thought he was going to win a Heisman his first year, that didn't happen, and I guess you can certainly be disappointed with big games. And I think if we want to talk, and I do want to ask John kind of some of his thoughts, since I'm not sure how much we've had really a chance to debrief the Indiana game, having kind of rewatched everything again, and kind of some of the things that he wrote about a couple weeks ago about kind of Dante in those moments. But I've just got this pulled up here on PFF, sixth best quarterback grade in the country. The names ahead of them are the guys you would expect. You got Fernando Mendoza, Julian Sayin, Diego Pavia, big time guys that were in the conversation for the Heisman Trophy or won the Heisman Trophy in Fernando's case to end the season. So he was, I think, one of the best quarterbacks. I think the counting stats prove that out too, in terms of just 30 touchdowns, threw for over 3,500 yards. Interceptions were a little high compared to previous Oregon quarterbacks. And frankly, like for me, as we turn the page to 26, protecting the football, and Oregon was, I think, spoiled to a certain degree with like Bo Nix and even Dylan Gabriel to a little bit lesser extent, but like Bo Nix just like didn't turn the ball over. I frankly can't get over the 15-1 touchdown to interception ratio he had in 23, 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. That's not really what you would expect, especially from a guy in his first year starting. But in year 2 for Dante, I guess this is maybe the place to start. And I'll toss it to John kind of on this note, but we think about the progress Bo Nix made from year 1 in this system, or year 1 at Oregon, from 2022 to 2023. And 23, he ends up being a Heisman Trophy finalist. To me, the expectation for 26 for Dante Moore is to take that next kind of step, a similar step from being, hey, yeah, I'm in the conversation as one of the better quarterbacks in the country. But now in year 2 in this system, I'm in the conversation for best players in the country and maybe the best quarterback in the country, as Bo was. Obviously loses to Jaden Daniels, but like those two were right in that conversation along with Penix that year. I think that's where we're expecting Dante to be, and for that to be solidified in 26.
I think he probably surpassed expectations. If you look back to last summer, and it was the talk was Arch Manning and Lenora Sellers, and Dante wasn't really in that conversation of a first round quarterback. I mean, kind of, we didn't really know what the expectation was going to be because we hadn't seen him in a year. There was, with so many of the quarterbacks, it was kind of that situation at the top of college football this past season. But now he's going to be heading into 2026, like you were saying, as that kind of proven guy where he's going to come in with expectations to be a first round pick, to be a Heisman candidate, to, make that leap from year 1 to year 2. I think it's going to be interesting just in the fact that you don't have that linear development of working in the same system with the same coordinator and Will Stein. But Drew Maringer has been there and been there for all of Dan Lanning's tenure. And we saw Bo Nix go from working with Kenny Dillingham to working with Will Stein in year 2. And that's when he really flourished in that second year playing for the Ducks. So I think getting Dante back was just absolutely massive for this team. It set the expectation, it set the floor, ceiling, everything, just completely raised it out of the roof for this team to make them look like a true national championship contender heading into 2026. And that all starts with the quarterback position.
From his PFF grading standpoint, the best probably performance when you factor in score and opponent was Washington. It's not his highest PFF grade, but it's his third highest, 90.7 overall grade. But the fact that Washington's defense was pretty good, their program is a bowl eligible team. It was on the road. Situation of can't lose. He delivered in that moment. The USC game, another one the week before, 86.7, the fifth highest total for his time at Oregon. And then Eric, you brought this up. The three games against the three games against the toughest competition, one against Texas Tech and two against Indiana, were at the bottom. Texas Tech was 61. That's not a horrible grade. It's also not really a great grade. It's just kind of average. But the Indiana ones, that's the concern. 47.8, 47.3. 135 total snaps in those two games, and essentially the same score. That tells you consistency. The growth there is where this needs to happen. And I think some of that probably is things that are kind of out of his control. It's hard for him to be successful if his offensive line can't protect. And that was very much the case against Texas Tech early on. That was also the case both times against Indiana. But he has to get better in those big games to take the next step, and probably for this Oregon program to take the next step. And that's where you bank on the fact that he's coming back for his third year of starter level regular contributing seasons of college football, his fourth overall, his second year as a starter at Oregon. That's where you hope the maturation and the growth happens.
I want to toss it to John here in a second to kind of dive into some of the specifics that stand out with growth for Dante, but just to put the finishing touches on that Dante Bo Nix progress comparison I made earlier. It's pretty startling. Their first year as a starter at Oregon, statistically at least. I'm just going to run through this. For Bo Nix in 2022, again, first year at Oregon, completed 71.8% of his passes, 3,589 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Dante Moore completed 71.8% of his passes, 3,565 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, like identical completion percentages, 30 yards apart, a couple touchdowns more for Bo, 3 interceptions more for Dante. Again, I think that's an area to improve upon. But in general, like you put those next to each other, it's like that very, very similar seasons their first year. My question is, what does Dante need to do to get to where Bo was his final year at Oregon, where again, that exploded with 4,500 yards, completion percentage, an NCAA record, 77.3, and then 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And John, just to toss it over to you, I know you wrote a little story, and it's been maybe 10 days now since you put it together on kind of what Dante you see needs to get kind of done here to be that player that takes that step, and kind of where are some things that you landed at in terms of those attributes and growth potential.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing from that second Indiana game was just some confidence stuff where the first one, it felt like he wasn't seeing things right. And then the second one, it was like he would see it, but then just react just a split second too late. And all of a sudden, then the pass rush gets there because the protection wasn't there. I thought overall he operated better in that second game for sure than the first one. Like, I mean, you just look at the stats. I mean, 285 versus 186 in the first game, passing yardage wise. He had drives where he was able to move the ball. Like that first one, when the run game was going and they could have him on schedule, he could hit some things because Dante has, a level of arm talent, a level of operation, within the system that not all college quarterbacks have. And it really gives Oregon's offense an advantage over most teams. So I think it's just continuing to, it's all those things that he's just going to get with more starts, which is, that was the question for him going into the NFL was he was going to be going in with 20 starts. It would have been like the fewest of any starter in the league, except for Kyler Murray, depending on where he's starting next season. Like it was just like a level of inexperience that you really don't see, and it would have probably hindered him, even though there's that opportunity there to make the instant money, this season in the draft. But I think the long-term opportunity is just way better if you can get to that second contract. If the development's there, you get those extra starts in college and just kind of build up that confidence and all that stuff that it was kind of lacking. And it's more reps, it's more game reps. You can't really develop that anywhere else. And to get 15, 16 extra starts, he's going to be at 35 next year. It's going to be a lot better heading into the NFL draft, I think. And by the end of next season, that's when it's really going to come down to those big games for Oregon. And you hope at that point that development's there, where this is a guy who's been in college for 4 years. He's one of the most, we've heard about his maturity, from national people, talking about like him in the draft class and stuff, being a very mature guy for his age. I think he absolutely has the opportunity to get there by the end of next season. It's just putting that all together. The weapons are going to be there for sure. If you can protect him, that's going to be the big question now, I think, at this point.
Running back? Do we want to move to running back?
I think the only other thing is just Dylan Raiola's here as the backup. They've upgraded the backup quarterback situation. We don't need to go
significantly.
By a lot. And hopefully, knocked on wood, that doesn't matter at all in 26, but just worth mentioning. Oregon, and probably one of the more expensive quarterback rooms, having both those guys together in 1 year.
You'll probably still see Brock Thomas on a regular basis in blowouts, because to preserve Dylan Raiola's red shirt, he only can play in 4 games. So it'll be, I guess, from a Raiola standpoint, it'll be fascinating to see how Oregon chooses, or where Oregon chooses to use him in the season. Do they?
And he'll be coming back from injury too, so that'll just slow his development and stuff in the spring and summer and that stuff even too. So,
like, do we see them go the first 2 or 3 games of the season? I know Boise State's probably going to be a tougher one. It's not guaranteed that there's going to be a ton of reps for Raiola, but at Oklahoma State and then at home against Portland State could be a game where Raiola gets in for a good quarter and a half. But are there other avenues to find him on the field, or is it going to be a pick and choose opportunity? There's the first 4 that come to mind, you put him in. But you'll probably still see Brock Thomas. And if he's your backup quarterback, knowing that if a major injury happens, Raiola comes off redshirt more than likely.
That's the plan, right? And I guess one thing, Matt, is the NCAA looking at extending the redshirt rule to 9 games? Isn't that something they talked about? So if that's
incredibly stupid, by the way.
At that point, just everybody has 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Or the redshirt, everyone just uses a redshirt first year, basically.
Correct.
So,
let's go to running back. A position group that you had 4 guys with 45 or more carries on the season, 3 guys with 75 or more carries on the season, 2 guys with over 100, no one with more than 129 carries. No one hit 1,000 yards rushing. That's a little bit of a surprise to me, but when you go by committee, that really hampers the ability for guys to get there. I think if Noah Whittington had stayed healthy throughout the entirety of the season, he probably gets there. He leads the team in rushing yards, 829. He had 6 touchdowns. Jordan Davidson, who was second on the team in carries with 113. And mind you, that's a couple games less than everybody else. Mm-hmm. He had 15 touchdowns, more than double anyone else on the roster, 3 times as much as De'Aaron Hill, who was third on the team in rushing with 5 touchdowns and 656 yards. So Hill had significantly fewer carries and almost the same number of yards, but Jordan Davidson had the bell run of, I'm the every down short yardage back. I have to get the tough yardage. I have to get the ones across the goal line to score touchdowns.
The more I think about, and we need to at least spend a moment on Noah Whittington, just reflecting on his career here. But the more I think about the Hill and Davison backfield, I kind of compare it to what happens at Penn State over the 4 years, where those 2 guys, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, were going to go down. I haven't looked, but they were going to go down as 1 and 2 potentially on the Penn State rushing list. I don't know if that's feasible at Oregon, because you have to be on an incredible pace. I mean, Royce Freeman rushed for over 1,500 yards, I think 3 of his seasons or something silly like that. And LaMichael had over that number, I think, in all 3, and then didn't play as a senior because he went pro. But I'm not saying they're going to be at the top, but I look at these 2 similarly of this is the backfield for the future, and you have to be so excited. And to Matt's point, they complement each other really well in terms of, you've got a player in Davidson who's, I think, durability was awesome all year. I mean, every week it seemed like we heard he was dealing with something. Obviously, it ends in a tough spot, but I think that even kind of proved it to me, just kind of how tough this kid was. Because I remember shaking his hand in the Orange Bowl locker room down in Miami, not thinking anything of it. And little did I know, like 4 days later, we would learn how he had to get surgery on his clavicle, and the season was over. I love the way he runs, and then De'Aaron Hill is just an absolute freak show in the open field, and had so many explosive 20, 30-yard runs, but also some in like the 60-plus yard category, which was, if we remember going into 25, that was the issue in 24. I think they had like the lowest number of 30 or more yard runs that they'd had in like a decade. Like, it was not an explosive rush offense. We found that a little bit with De'Aaron Hill. They found that a little bit with Noah Whittington. And Whittington's a guy who's, I guess, just to kind of give him his flowers here, the big impact for me going forward is who's kind of the alpha veteran in that room. Because, you know, I think it was talked about, and Matt, you wrote a story with Rashad Samples about how Noah, like, he's like, hey, that guy should be coaching at some point soon. Like, this guy's a veteran presence. And when you lose that, and now it's all basically sophomores, which is what it'll be, sophomores and freshmen, like, is there a drop off? I don't really expect there will be. It's more a question of like, how do these guys step up together? But man, I think you have to be just absolutely thrilled for where this running back room is at right now. And frankly, here's just one last thing before I toss it over to John. Looking at PFF grades in the Big Ten a year ago, these were running backs 1, 2, and 6. De'Aaron Hill was the best running back based upon PFF run grades. Davison was actually tied. I'm looking at it a little more closely here. I just saw the order. Both 91.4 run grades. That makes them tied for tops in the Big Ten, ahead of Katron Allen, who I mentioned a moment ago, and then Noah Whittington not far behind at 6th. Like, Oregon had, based upon PFF grades at least, arguably the best backfield in the Big Ten in 2025, and I don't think there's any question. You look at 2026, those top two guys are both back together, but that's going to be probably the best or one of the best in the conference and maybe the country.
Real quick before that, John, it gets even better, Eric. You zoom out nationally, and you look at running backs that had at least 65 carries or 61 carries on the year. Oregon has the two. Davison and Hill are tied for the 8th best PFF grade in the country. Noah Whittington is 25th in the country. They weren't just the best in the Big Ten. They were by far some of the best individually in the country, and collectively, there's no one that comes even close to the level of production and grade that Oregon had as a running back room. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, this group doesn't have the pure depth that it did going into last season. We talked about they were giving handoffs to 7 guys in the first couple of weeks, but it just in terms of the 1-2 at the top, it's going to be, like you said, as good as just about anybody in the country. And to have guys that do complement each other so well, while you're losing that veteran presence in Noah Whittington, I think there is some expectation that just because Davison and Hill played so much as freshmen, they're kind of veterans beyond their years a little bit. So I think kind of collectively they can kind of step into that role for the room. DeJuan Riggs is another name behind there to know and could end up, playing a big role as the third running back. I really liked him as a true freshman in his limited touches a couple seasons ago. He flashed at times last year, but just having Davison and Hill is going to be so huge going into this season, knowing that I have this 1-2 at the top, and I have a guy who can be my pass protector, can be my short yardage guy, and then you have Hill, who is a big playmaker and can break big ones. You hope there's some expectation at some point that he does develop a little bit more of that 3-down skill set, so you can rotate those guys and not kind of give things away if Hill's out there. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they continue to do, especially with like the 21 personnel sets when they have the two of them out there together. I think it's gonna be really good for this team in 2026.
I'm happy you touched on that, because that was the next place I wanted to go, and this is kind of how we're going to operate with all these. Talk about the starters and then the depth, and the depth at running back is very different, right? You lose Jaden Lamar, Mekhi Hughes, Jay Harris, who again typically capped for playing in that game that he didn't necessarily need to. Hopefully, he has a great year at Kansas State to close his college career. DeJuan Riggs was out for the end of the year there with an injury. I don't know kind of what the timeline for him being full go will be, but like he was pretty clearly not available at the end. And I'm fascinated by Tredarian Ball. Like, that's a guy who I know they also added Brandon Smith, another freshman running back who committed and flipped from Arizona. He'll sign here, and gosh, signing day is like a week away. had not fully computed that piece of information, I don't think. But Ball is like as dynamic as Hill, and the versatility, like he is extremely exciting to watch on film, and I anticipate we'll have an impact right away. I don't know if it'll be De'Aaron Hill, that kind of an impact. Maybe it will be. And if this is a three-headed monster with those three young backs, couple sophomores and freshmen, and one freshman in 2026, like that's a really exciting group. But the other part I wanted to toss out there to John's point is like, if you want to talk about like the growth potential and where these players need to improve, I totally agree with De'Aaron Hill. Like he needs to be an every down back. And I think coming into the semifinal had like 1 or 2 snaps in pass protection all season. Like he was a specialist who did not do that at all. That's an area he needs to grow. And then to your also point, like in 21 personnel, those two can operate together, but who could, I guess, replicate the Jordan Davison component? Like that was Jaden Lamar's role. And I think at times maybe Jay Harris did a little bit of that. They don't really have another back on this team based upon body type, skill set, kind of blocking acumen to carry that. So I'll be curious to see how that's utilized, and maybe we'll see that cut down a little bit. But I loved when Davison and Hill were on the field together. I thought I'd love to see kind of just the I guess the success rate on those type of run plays when they shared the field together, because it felt like, to me at least, like that was a pretty high rate of success and explosive play even when those two were out there together.
I think there's also the need to get these guys back. These guys, meaning the room, back to being weapons in the passing game. When it was Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington, I think some of the receiver play forced Oregon to get creative to have these guys be involved. But Bucky's last season had 56 catches for 413 yards and 2 touchdowns. The year before that, in 2022, he had 31 catches for 299 yards at Oregon. You look at Noah Whittington and his usage this year, he had 19 receptions for under 100 yards.
Yeah.
In 2024, he had 24 catches. 2022, he had 22 catches for 169. I won't really worry about 23 because he was hurt for most of the year. But now that the receiver room is healthy again and things are kind of back to normal, if you will, I'll be curious to see if they can expand their roles a little bit. And that will help with a guy like De'Aaron Hill, who clearly needs to get better at passing. If the pass blocking, if they can go out and trot him out as a weapon in the passing game, that alone will help him in the run game, because it was very obvious. Oh, when he's getting the football on a handoff. Now it's not going to be the case if they can expand on his role. And maybe that's Tredarian Ball, who Rashad Samples has said has every bit of a chance to play like De'Aaron Hill and Jordan Davidson did going into 2025. He said if he wanted to be a high-level recruit at the receiver position, he could have chose to do that, gone through the high school process of being a high school receiver instead of a running back, and would still have the same number of offers, would still be viewed in the light that he is today of being a top 50 player in the country. So I'll be curious to see how he fits in. And you guys are right. Like, they need a second physical guy. Who that becomes, I don't know, because if Davidson goes down with an injury like he did late in the year against Georgia in the Peach Bowl, that's where things get real dicey. If you don't have that between the tackles runner, maybe Hill, maybe Ball transform themselves into that guy. I don't know. I'm a little surprised. That's where you wonder where it comes from. And I'm also a little surprised, and it's probably one of those good surprises, that Riggs didn't leave. Like I kind of had him pegged as towards the end of the year, there's no way this guy's coming back. In terms of, not that I don't think he can't help Oregon, I just don't think he looked at this as a path to success on the field, and I want to play, so I need to go somewhere else. And so I'm in a positive manner surprised he stuck it through, because that just gives Oregon, if he's your 4th or 5th running back, that tells you how special and deep the room is.
I wonder if they can get him a medical hardship, by the way. He played 5 games. Could he be a freshman again in 2026? One thing, I was just looking at it. This is a statistical anomaly, I think. I was looking at the receiving stats for both Davison and Hill, and you're right. Like the production just wasn't quite there. I mean, Hill had 16 catches for 137 yards. And this is what's weird is that Jordan Davison had 12 for 62. He had a better yards per carry average than a yards per reception average, which I don't think you see very often. But yeah, no, but if I'm being honest, right, I think I feel better about those guys being explosive in the open field collectively than maybe I do between the tackles, with the obvious exception being Davison, who excels there. So it's a really talented room, but you're right. There's kind of some components of it that we need to see how it all fits together. The puzzle pieces are all there, but where they are kind of need to be placed, I think, is kind of a question coming in. But I think like a lot of Oregon fans, at the end of the podcast, you're going to do a position by position offensive kind of ranking. I think that's probably the best group on the team right now, if I'm being honest, that or quarterback. So you have to feel really, really good. This is an elite pair of what will be sophomore running backs. And now it's just about how does the rest of this come together. And I guess the only other question is like, how long is Jordan Davison out with this? Does that slow him at all? I think it'll probably cost him part of spring, but shouldn't be something that lingers into the summer based upon typical timelines for recovery for an injury like this.
And I think Hill is a bit more physical of a runner than people kind of realize. When you think about how explosive he is, it's just kind of developing those other things that Davison does that in terms of the blocking, being able to hit those holes between the tackles that need to kind of take that next step for him to become a true three down back for this team. So
time to move to receiver. Another position group that is going to see a lot of options over the last 2 seasons move out of the program from graduation.
Mm-hmm.
New faces emerge. New playmakers have developed. We've also got Evan Stewart, who will be kind of a bridge between that 2024 team and the 2026 team. We'll see what he looks like healthy after being out for the entire 2025 football season. What kind of impact can he make? But De'Corian Moore is back. He's your wide receiver one per se.
I think so.
34 catches, 497 yards, 3 touchdowns. The injury that he sustained in middle of October or so.
It was right before Iowa.
Right before Iowa. So that would be Iowa was an early November game. So the last half of the season, he kind of got derailed. The last game in the regular season he played was October 25th against Wisconsin in the monsoon. He had 3 catches for 45 yards. After that, he had 1 catch for 5 yards against JMU, 3 catches for 21 yards against Texas Tech, and then 2 catches for 28 yards against Indiana. So 6 total catches and less than 60 yards receiving in the 3 games that he played after coming back from injury. He didn't look the same, and that's to be expected when you have a knee injury and you come back mid-year. I'll be curious to see where his growth is next season. Where does he expand? Where does he grow? But I think the story of the season for Oregon has been in 2025, bridging to 2026, is Jeremiah McClellan.
Mm-hmm.
Third on the team in receiving yards with 557 on 38 catches. He had 3 touchdowns. He had kind of the year I think we maybe were expecting De'Corian Moore to have. And I don't know if that necessarily was on my bingo card at the beginning of the year. I looked at J-Mac as third guy on the depth chart of the position group. If he has a couple touchdowns and he has maybe 150, 250 receiving yards, probably a good year because of all the guys ahead of him. Now, all of a sudden, he's forced into action, and it changes my perspective on Oregon's receiver room. They've got 2 legitimate wide receiver number 1 candidates on this team.
I think they have 3 with Evan. I mean,
sure. I just get worried with Evan because he hasn't played for a whole year.
No, and just to hit that one, I do worry as well, and this is probably a really unfair comparison, but like I hope it's not a Jaleel Florence kind of situation where this guy was pre-injury. Jaleel Florence's were really, really high in corner. He had some great moments back in, what was that, 2023? And then he gets hurt, doesn't play at all in 24. And then by 25, he's just seemingly a shell of himself, or maybe the younger guys are just better and he doesn't play. I hope that's not the Evan Stewart final chapter at Oregon. I don't really think it will be. But I'm with you that it's kind of hard to know what to do with him since we haven't seen him since the Big Ten championship game, because he didn't play in the Rose Bowl. So it's been a long time ago. I think DeCorian Moore is going to have a huge year. I think he's going to explode and be like potentially a Biletnikoff candidate this year. I really do. And I think it gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. He was the team's leading receiver through 8 weeks. He had some really impressive moments in big games. Like I think of some of the catches early against Oregon State, those back shoulders. Remember that game? They just threw like 3 or 4 back shoulder fades, and the caliber of catch he was making out there. Some of the catches against Penn State in big moments, that I think they called it the hands catch on the telecast, but just the strength of his hands, and we were talking about just what's this guy's weakness? It didn't really feel like there was one. And, post injury comes back. He's probably not 100%, but it was pretty clear. It was also like, this is Malik Benson and Jeremiah McClellan's group right now. And they just kind of leaned on those guys. And I don't really fault them for that. I don't think that is what the hierarchy will look like in 26. Like I think DeCorian is your alpha. And I expect him to have a huge season. And I think J-Mac could also have a huge season. This is a really interesting room out wide, because we talk about those two. You throw in Evan Stewart. Gatlin Bear, for everything we've heard, looks awesome, bigger than people expected. Like
he's a lot bigger than I anticipated.
Like I'm curious to see what he's listed at, but he could be like a 6'2", 205 kind of weight. And if he's able to run, I was just looking this up recently, he ran like 10-1 in the 100 meters as a high school senior. If he has anywhere near that sort of speed, like you can't keep that guy off the field. Jalen Lott is a 5-star who's also really, really exciting and dynamic. Iverson Hooks in the slot was awesome last year at UAB. I believe I had it in a story recently. Is the 8th best PFF grade of anybody in the country. So talk about this collectively. They probably don't need to play 2 tight ends anymore, right? Like that was out of necessity last year. I don't know if that's going to be out of necessity this year. I mean, assuming, again, I'm going to keep knocking on wood, because Oregon dealt with a lot of injuries last year, and you hope 26 things play out differently. But the ceiling of this group is so high, and the speed is outrageous. Like almost everybody I ran through, I think ran sub 10.4 in the 100 meters, and they lose Malik Benson, who I bet you is going to run. John, what do you think Malik Benson will run in the 40 at the combine?
It's somewhere in the 4.3s, like low 4.3s.
Yeah, we were saying like somewhere between 4.34, 4.38 or something like that. That's I think there's a handful of guys on the current roster who could hit that number too. So that's the thing that's exciting with this group, is the speed and the ability to stretch the field, but also the dynamicism in the open field and the ability to win on those underneath routes. Like I thought that was another thing with DeCorian that stood out, was just like hit him on a slant, he goes, or hit him in a screen pass, and he can go and weave through traffic. And he's so stocky and well put together, he's hard to bring down. So only 2 guys who are returning had statistics really of any kind in 2025. So if you want to like sound the alarm bells, that would be the place to do it. But the overall talent here, I think, is unparalleled for an Oregon receiver room. I'm counting 5 former 5-stars in this group.
A lot.
Like that's a ton. That's a lot of talent. And the other one is Jeremiah McClellan, who is a top 100 guy. Like this is a really talented group.
Yeah, I think that the depth is just what instantly stands out. I mean, you talk about top talent, but like you were saying, like it can go 5 or 6 guys deep. Like even a guy like Dylan Gresham, we didn't see him at all last season because of the neck injury. But coming out of the spring game, he had like 100 yards in the spring game, and was like just getting just as much excitement as Jeremiah McClellan entering the summer and stuff. So yeah. I think this like DeCorian Moore, like you were saying, like he was really coming along. I think in down the kind of that stretch of the season before he got hurt. I think back to the Penn State game, I felt like he was really emerging as a true like number 1 receiver when you need to go get it. We're looking to DeCorian Moore on 3rd down because we know he can get open. We know he can win his one-on-one balls. And I think, like you're saying, Biletnikoff could be Biletnikoff candidate, like one of the best receivers in the country, over 1,000 yards could be the expectation for him this season. But I think it's also going to be interesting to see just how they end up going through this rotation when you have so many pieces. You have 3 guys who are really good outside receivers. So does Dakorien Morris get a little bit more time in the slot? Do they move him around to kind of scheme up some looks for him? How does Evan Stewart look coming back? And then what do they do with Iverson Hooks? I think is really interesting. Is going to be interesting to see, because Tez Johnson was so huge as a part of this offense, like as the slot receiver, and Iverson Hooks. It's hard to kind of put that Tez Johnson expectation on somebody. But like you said, really good season at UAB last year, and is a guy similar type profile where he's going to be like a smaller guy operating in the slot almost exclusively, and like a yards after catch kind of guy there. And then Jalen Lott, another guy who we saw a 5-star freshman make an impact this year for Oregon. Jalen Lott is Oregon's one of their highest ranked recruits overall. And if you put him in the slot, he's another guy who can really be a playmaker for this team this year early on in his career.
Talent is not an issue.
No.
This is as talented, as loaded of a position group as the Ducks have ever had, probably, here. So the expectations now is probably maximizing that talent, maximizing that potential, turning that talent, turning that production, that potential into on-field success. And I'll be curious to see, how many guys, how deep do they want to go? How far do they expand the room? Does feel a little like they do have like J-Mac, Corian Moore, Jalen Lott, Gresham, Evan Stewart. They're all kind of, to a degree, the same receiver, from a body profile standpoint.
There is not a lot of height variance. Everyone's like 5'11" to 6'1".
Yes. So how can you scheme around that? And the one thing I look at is when you lose games and you want to improve, you look at the teams that beat you, the teams that were better than you. In Indiana, I look at how physical Indiana receivers were, whether it was on the short stuff and stiff arms or whether it was on the back shoulder throws. It just felt like they could play through contact. They could play through a guy being draped all over them. We saw it twice. And all you had to do is throw the back shoulder fade, and their players were physical enough to fight through the contact, make the catch, and move the chains. That's the next step. That's what you're looking for. I think they've got the talent. They've got the speed. Dakorien Moore's downfield blocking is tremendous. But they have the guys. Can they develop the guys if they don't? To be that true physical menace on the field where when you step on, it's like, oh, man, we're going to have to deal with these guys. We have to gang tackle because one guy alone is probably not going to get it done.
One thing I wanted to do at most position groups, and it didn't really make sense at running back or quarterback because it was pretty self-explanatory, is just to do a little like depth chart preview. And like I'll just get your reaction on kind of where my head's at. I think you've got Dakorien at the X, you've got Hooks at the slot, and you've got McClellan at the Y as your line 1. And then line 2, probably Stewart. I said Z, right?
Z, yeah. Y is tight end.
Y is tight end. So that makes no sense. Z. Anyway, it's early-ish. The second line, Evan at the X, probably Jalen Lott at the slot. I didn't really know where to put him. And then at the Z, we'll put Gatlin Bear with that straight line speed to stretch the defense a little bit. Like that feels appropriate, I guess. Anything you would change on that, John or Matt? I don't know. That it feels like looking back from right now, that feels rightish.
Yeah, that seems like the group right now. The question is Evan Stewart, can he put himself back into that first line of receivers? But Jeremiah McClellan is going to be hard competition to kind of surpass. When you're talking about physicality, Matt, that's the guy that stands out to me there. I mean, we saw the big catch he had down the sideline against Indiana, but he was they use him as a blocker. You talk about Dakorien Moore's blocking downfield, but they scheme him up in the blocking kind of in a similar way we saw with Justice Lowe a couple of years ago as a receiver. And I think he's definitely the most physical out of Oregon's guys, and I think that could be something that you look at Evan Stewart and he's got this speed downfield and a jump ball guy, but McClellan doesn't have that top end speed, but really good on the jump balls and a really physical receiver who does things that are going to make him hard to take off the field.
I had one last thing before I move to tight end, and that's just the value of the slot receiver in this offense. because it was pretty much absent in 2025, right? Like Gary had the big moment at Penn State, and I don't want to just make this a slam on Gary thing, because part of it was he gets hurt and then they just don't have a slot receiver for like the back half of the season. And when he comes back, he's even less involved than DeCorian, essentially. I look back to the success in 23 and 24 and just think of the value of Tez Johnson in this offense and what that absence looked like. And whether it's Iverson Hooks or whether it's Jalen Lott or whether it's to the point I think one of you guys made earlier, like maybe DeCorian spends a little bit more time in there, right? Like that could work really well. I just think that feels like something I'm kind of looking at as we enter 26 is like, what's the usage there going to be like? And how does that open up this pass offense a little bit? And it's not an offense throwing the football that was like bad or anything. I thought the usage of the tight ends and how they utilized both those two guys, which we'll talk about in a second, was excellent and really fun to watch. But I think this offense is going to look more like what we saw back in 2023 and 24 with whoever it is that emerges at slot, because they've got so much explosiveness there that was kind of absent this past year. Like that was a position that basically disappeared and was not even really in rotation or hardly utilized at all back when you get into December and January.
I would probably, my starting lineup across the board would probably be more McClellan and Hooks as the three guys that start. Yeah. So I would lean there. And then Evan Stewart, I'm being super cautious. I don't want to put too much expectation on him. I also don't want to say he's not going to do anything, but the injury he had, and I think Erik, I think you brought up earlier Jalil Florence. I think that's a really good kind of comparison to just kind of keep in your head. Because I hope it's a bad one.
I hope it's a bad one. I hope it's a bad comparison, but yeah.
100% agree. And then when I say good, I mean I'm not trying to say like that's where he's going to go, but it's a good like analogy of Florence was a first round draft, or not first round, but was a NFL draft pick had he gone in 2023 before he got hurt. He was on that path. That's where Evan Stewart was before he got hurt in the offseason. And does that all come back? That's going to be the big question for me. If it does, he'll replace Iverson Hooks in the slot, I think. And that changes things a little bit and gives you guys two other guys to work with. But let's take a quick timeout, and then when we come back, we'll dive into tight ends and offensive line. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Tight end room, one in which we knew they had the probable best tight end in the country going into the year in Kenyon Sadiq. He quite honestly felt underused. Some of that probably was injury related to guys around him, felt a little bit injury related to him. 51 receptions. He had 3 carries, so 54 total touches. For some reason in my head, am I crazy, or do I remember correctly that the Oregon staff, Will Stein in particular, said they had to get him like 80 touches? That was kind of their goal going into the season. I can't remember if that was something I've just made up in my mind or if that was a real thing.
But I don't remember that quote, but that doesn't feel unreasonable that someone would have said that.
But regardless of that's true or not, I don't know, maybe I made it up in my head. 51 receptions for 560 yards and 8 touchdowns just feels a little underused.
Here's the thing that's really interesting, and I've kind of gone back and forth with how to assess that. That's the most receptions by a tight end in school history. It's the second or third most yards and the second most touchdowns. So like on paper, that maybe is the best tight end season in school history. For the type of talent Kenyon Sadiq possesses, it doesn't feel like it's enough. Because if you compare him to, he's going to be a top 15-ish pick, and you look at the last 3 or 4 drafts and the guys that have gone in that range with like with Bowers, with Tyler Warren, with the name is escaping me, Colston Loveland. Like those 3 guys, completely, his numbers are dwarfs compared to what those guys did. Like it's not all that comparable. And so while he did have, I think statistically, like the best tight end season in school history, I kind of think I agree. And I say that as somebody who was kind of pushing back on that notion on the message board a couple of times when people were saying it, the more I kind of take a step back and have some perspective and kind of look at what the other elite tight ends have done in college in their final seasons, like I think so. I think that's fair to just kind of be like, yeah, guy's an incredible skill set. He had a really strong season. I think deservingly was in the Biletnikoff or on the Mackey Award final group there, the final three. I also don't know if it feels like you sent him off as his best. And part of it is like the other guy we're about to talk about, Jamari Johnson, statistically outproduced him over the back half of the season. And it wasn't even all that close. I think over the last 7, I had a stat in a story where Jamari had over 100 more yards receiving than Kenyon Sadiq over the final 7 games. So it's kind of a weird one to kind of process through. And depending upon what he does at the next level, it may feel even more I guess, significant, kind of the underutilization. Like if he goes out and just wherever he lands and is having 1,000-yard seasons early on in his career, you're going to be kind of like, yeah, the fact that he never got even close to that at Oregon is kind of a bummer. But the Jamari Johnson of this is so exciting.
Oh, yeah. Like, yeah, apparently Oregon had not only just maybe the best tight end in the country, they may have also had the second best tight end, or at worst, probably a top 10 guy in the country.
PFF grades would tell you that Jamari Johnson was significantly better than Kenyon Sadiq. I don't know if I agree. Like they have him as the 6th best offensive grade amongst regulars. They have Kenyon Sadiq pretty far down that list. Like it's 78 flat is the PFF grade for Jamari. And again, we can take these with a grain of salt. That's always my little caveat. But Sadiq was at 70.4. So, again, I don't know if I necessarily totally buy into the fact that Jamari just outperformed Kenyon on the season necessarily, but I think you can make the case. And now you look at 26 and say, very different skill set, very different player. But I think Oregon has a player who could be the best tight end in the country again in 2026 in Jamari Johnson. And this is a player who almost to a certain degree is more of the prototype in terms of the size speed combination than Kenyon. Kenyon is such an outlier in that he's a little bit undersized in height, a little bit, I don't want to say lean because this guy has probably the biggest shoulders and bicep tricep combination you've seen on the field, but it's like 6'3", 245, whereas Jamari's like 6'5", 6'6", 250, 260 pounds, and also runs really, really well. So yeah, they are going from one elite tight end to another elite tight end, and I think frankly this is not a position group that you look at as a weakness, although we'll talk about depth in a moment here, is completely unproven behind him.
Yeah, when you talk about Kenyon compared to the other like top tight ends in the draft in the last couple of years, it just wasn't like the offense wasn't built around him in the way it was for some of those other guys, especially like Tyler Warren. Everything was built around him at Penn State in the last couple of years. Brock Bowers pretty similarly at Georgia. It just wasn't really kind of put on him to kind of do that for the offense because there were enough weapons around him. And then, like you said with Jamari, it is interesting to see the way that usage is going to be different this year because they are different tight ends. Kenyon is such a unique skill set and athlete, and a guy who you have to kind of move around a lot. He essentially became Oregon's slot receiver down the stretch of the season. But Jamari is you can line him up on the line a little bit more as a blocker and stuff, but he also threatens vertically more than Kenyon Sadiq does, which I think is going to be interesting to see for this team next year. We saw it like down, especially like down the seams. He killed. Sadiq had some catches as well down the seams and stuff, but Jamari, the one-handed one against JMU, he had the touchdown on the opening drive, or the reopening drive against Indiana after the pick six. But yeah, I'm really excited about what he's going to do because he's just a guy that moves really like Kenyon Sadiq is. Kenyon Sadiq is a different type of mover as a tight end. He moves almost like he's built like a running back. You talk about 6'3", 245. He's almost like a Derrick Henry type build. He's not necessarily Derrick Henry, but it's more that kind of moving. Jamari Johnson's a really fluid athlete out in space. So I think we saw it a couple of times in that Indiana one where like he caught this check down that he took down all the way to like the 1 yard line or whatever it was, where he just makes like 2-3 guys miss in the open space. And when you're talking about a guy at 6'6", 250 to be able to do that, I'm really excited for what he's going to do because he got basically starting experience over the entire second half of the season when they were playing 12 personnel as their base.
I was just going to say, Jamari led the team in yards after catch, which probably isn't a huge surprise. He had like 300 yards after catch. And actually the other part that's interesting looking at that list is it's Jamari, it's Kenyon, and then it's De'Aaron Hill. And then the first receiver is Gary Bryant Jr. So receivers' yards after catch last year were significantly down, but obviously they utilized those tight ends in a way that allowed them to kind of, excel in that regard as well.
The big question there, you brought it up, is the depth behind these guys.
Yep.
Where do they turn to first behind Jamari Johnson, and how productive can these guys be? They added Marcus Dixon out of the portal from Clemson, but he was a tight end that then went to defensive end and is now coming back tight end when he joins Oregon. Andrew Olesh, who was a high-profile recruit as part of the 2025 recruiting class, but he really didn't play at all at Penn State.
0 snaps.
And I don't know if that was injury early on or what, but again, 0 snaps for this guy. Kendra Harrison, a borderline, depending on how you want to look at him, 5-star recruit, shows up. He's already here on campus. He's enrolled. He's joined the program. How quickly can you get him up to speed? How quickly does he adapt to the physicality of the sport? We obviously saw Kenyon Sadiq do that a couple of years ago. We've seen Terrence Ferguson do that. We've seen Maliki Motival do that as well. But it's hard, and it's a position that there's a lot of physicality. There's a lot of requirements that are asked of you. It might be the hardest position really to truly make an impact, because you've got to be athletic. You got to be able to make a play, but you also have to have the physicality at the line of scrimmage to hold your own in that area. It's a big ask for a true freshman. AJ Pugliano is back at that position. They did lose Roger Salapaga to the transfer portal. He probably would have been your clear number 2 and a viable option at that position, but it's also one I think the talent that's come in with, whether it's Harrison or Olesh, could probably make a good case to beat him out, but it wasn't a given. So where this production comes from behind them is going to be the big question. I mean, do we look at this as like I don't want to say a negative, but like a big question going into the offseason?
Well, here's something I've been thinking, and specifically skill players. We'll touch offensive line in a moment. This is probably the biggest drop off from the top player in the room to the number 2, right? Like you go at quarterback, like I know Raiola was kind of up and down, but this guy with starting experience, also a former 5-star, a guy who projects potentially to be like an NFL first-round pick if everything works out in a couple of years. Look at running back like Davidson and Hill. That's 2 elite guys. We just talked about receiver where you've got like a handful of former 5-stars. Like it's a guy in Jamari who could be a first-round player himself, and then guys who just legitimately haven't played college football. It is concerning. And now, glass half full, Erik also says, I really like the way this room comes together from a skill set perspective, because like Kendra Harrison is going to be an impact player in the passing game immediately. And you go watch some of the stuff he did as a high schooler. Like it's my favorite film to watch from the 26 class for Oregon, because you just don't see people who are 6'6", 6'7", 245, 250 pounds moving around, hurdling guys, high pointing, doing all the stuff he can do. Like he's a weapon immediately. Olesh is kind of in the same vein, like was a receiver more than a tight end in high school, was a little bit lean coming into Penn State. I think he needs to kind of fill out. Hopefully that redshirt year has set him up to do that. So those guys are pass catchers. And then Dixon is just block all the way. Like this is a guy who's never caught a pass. He's either played as an inline run and pass blocker or as a defensive end, as Matt mentioned earlier when he moved over there. So you at least can look at it and go like Jamari is a versatile pass catcher, quality blocker. You got Dixon who can block with him. So when they go inline, those two guys can work together. And then they have all these weapons that they can move around with Harrison and Olesh as receivers. But it does kind of feel like who's number 2 is a hard question to answer. It may be Kendra Harrison, but that may be just me kind of excited by the shiny new toy in this situation. But it's a room where I think you look at it and I do think it's a concern of like who the number 2 is, but I also think there's enough talent there that something is going to rise to the top that will be far better than just like replacement level play.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much they go to 2 tight end sets at all next year. Obviously, it's not going to be what it was at the end of this season when it became a thing out of necessity with the receiver room. But when you have so many guys and you have talented guys in the slot, you feel like, especially when it's just Jamari, that you have that confidence in on that starting line. I think we're not going to see a ton of two tight end sets unless it is Dixon getting in there for some specific blocking purposes down towards the goal line and stuff.
But just out of curiosity, John, do you remember what percentage they were playing out of two tight end at the end?
It was like it was 60. It was like 65 to 70 down the stretch.
It's crazy.
That was what they had to do. I mean, like I was saying, Kenyon became the starting slot receiver down the stretch of the season, basically.
Yeah.
Offensive line, 2025 really good, but this might be a hot take. I think Texas Tech and Indiana showed us why they maybe didn't win the Joe Moore Award.
It's fair.
Their inability at the edges, in particular, World and Harkey at tackle, left and right, were not good against the best of the best rushers that they faced this season. And Bailey was unbelievable for Texas Tech. I mean, that, like the first play of the game, however, I think it was that Dante Moore just gets thrown on his back. Like that just set the tone right there of, oh boy, it might be a long, long day for the tackles at Oregon. And in Indiana's games, they mauled them and confused, the offensive line. Poncho is back. I think he's going to be an All-American, high draft pick. There's no fault really. I don't think with him, but I do think you've got some questions on the edges, and I think Emmanuel Pregnon was a good step in the right direction at one of the guard positions of just being a nasty mauler, but you need now more of that. You can't have just one of those guys. You need 3 or 4 of those guys, and do they have that on the roster? I don't know. It's that weird dynamic. I've got a ton of confidence in these guys, but I'm a little skeptical when they maybe match up against the best of the best of the best.
I have a lot of confidence in Erik Terry. I also think this is it's pretty. I don't want to say precarious is probably too strong, but like I look at it and this is the biggest concern I think I have on offense or defense right now is offensive line play. Poncho is a steadying force in the middle. The rest of the guys that they return, I don't know if I have massive confidence in. Like I thought Iuli was the weakest lineman for most of the season. I think at times maybe you could make a case Harkey and World were in that conversation, but I think collectively Iuli was probably 5 out of 5 from the starting perspective. Pregnon was clearly your best. He was arguably the best guard in the country if you use PFF grades. Poncho was a Remington Trophy finalist again, or for the first time. Like I think that was deserving. I thought he had a strong season. Some snap issues popped up at the end of the season, and I still kind of want to get clarity on like whether was that turf related or grass related? Was that him related? Was that something else related?
I also thought Tyreek Tucker and Lee Hunter gave him some problems in those last 2 games.
Okay, fair. So I feel good about center. I kind of am concerned about everybody else. If that, and that's not to say they won't be awesome, but like Fox Crater, Janoris Wilson are your tackles. Maybe Michael Bennett comes in from Yale, and I think Janoris, I'm still a little bit wary of. Like last time Matt and I saw him at the Orange Bowl, this guy was his foot was in a cast and he was using a scooter. I heard he broke a foot back during the Iowa game, so he's not going to be necessarily available for all of spring or all of the offseason. So what's the progress? Does that open the door for Bennett to start? And then at guard, like I guess I'll put it this way. There's so much young talent we just don't know anything about on this roster that I probably should reserve judgment being too concerned. But at the same time, I think because they're going to rely on so much young talent like this, it's reasonable to have questions. Because if it's going to be like Fox Crater at one tackle, Janoris Wilson at the other, like maybe Douglas Utu, or maybe it's Kavika Rogers finally gets his shine as a senior. It's hard for me to look at this line and think that they're going to upgrade in its totality from this last season. And to the point Matt just brought up, I think it's a fair one. Unfortunately, when they played the best teams on their schedule, it wasn't good enough. And so, yeah, I buy into Malik Terry. I think this is the spot on the whole roster that I'm probably most wary of, though. And it doesn't mean it won't be really, really good. I wonder how it's going to be against the elite competition, though, because I think that's been kind of a trend, even though it's been Joe Moore Award finalist, Joe Moore Award finalist, Joe Moore Award finalist for elite groups all 3 years.
You're relying on a lot of internal development for this team. And while that's not been necessarily a problem, we've seen good development stories like guys like Poncho and getting Poncho back.
Huge.
What I say about the last couple of games of the season, having the steadying force of a Remington finalist center in the middle of things is going to be huge for this team. Like if you were trying to get the center going and stuff, everything too next year, I think that was going to be a real problem. So I think having Poncho back is going to be huge for this team. But you're relying on a lot of internal development for a team that really hasn't done that. When you look at their best O lineman, Josh Connerly was a 5-star recruit and had a 5-star recruit career and went in the first round. But the Oregon's other tackles have mostly come out of the transfer portal. Their best lineman last year, Emmanuel Pregnon, came out of the transfer portal. And now you're counting on Fox Crater, Janoris Wilson, potentially, Michael Bennett. I've heard a lot of people say he's going to kick inside to guard and not really even start at tackle for this team. So you need those guys to develop this season. You're gonna be counting on a lot from Malik Terry in terms of kind of getting those guys to that level, because we saw it on the biggest stages when you're playing the best pass rushers. Isaiah World was just not holding up one-on-one against Mikhail Kamara, and when Alex Harkey had to try to protect the edge against David Bailey in the Orange Bowl, that just they didn't have the speed for that. I don't know if World didn't have the speed for that. There were some other issues going on there where Kamara is just freaky, twitchy and stuff off the edge. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the guards situation looks like, because that was the strength of this team last year was the inside of the offensive line and the way they were able to push people around it and run it up the middle. You feel like you have two really big physical guys in Dave Iuli and Poncho on that right side, but what does that left guard situation look like? And Fox Crater held up really well in pass pro in some limited reps last year, but I didn't love him as a run blocker. So you're counting on a lot of development at this point for a lot of young guys like Fox Crater. It's a redshirt sophomore. You're asking him to go out there and potentially protect the blind side of a first round quarterback.
The positive to that, and that kind of goes right where I was going to lean here, is I just went through all the snap counts for the last couple seasons along the offensive line. Going into the 2026 season, Crater at left tackle, Janoris Wilson at right tackle, by far have the most snaps from the previous year returning going into a starting role. So, as a backup, they played the most of a player at left tackle or right tackle as a backup, and still on the roster.
This eliminates the Connerly and Cornelius returning a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying as players emerging from backups to starters, right?
Correct. Yeah, I didn't explain that very well, but they have the most. Wilson played 140 snaps at right tackle. Crater played 129 this past season at left tackle. If you go to previous years and you look at kind of what the backup did behind a departing player, no one comes close to the number of snaps that these guys have played. So to me, that tells me that Oregon has seen enough based on what they've done in the portal to feel like there's something here that we can work with that we know has got it's going to translate onto the field. It already kind of has. They just need the reps and the steps in spring ball and fall camp to get themselves ready. It's a gamble, 100%. It's a gamble. I get it, but that's gonna that gives me at least a little bit of comfort here, knowing these guys have played over 130 snaps, and that's basically the equivalent of 2 games. They've seen something in those snaps to feel comfortable enough, at least outwardly towards the public, that these 2 guys could be your bookends. I agree with John. Michael Bennett probably going to slide inside. Does Anacho, the true freshman 5-star offensive lineman, does he arrive and does he find his way into the offensive line? What about a Douglas Utu as an interior guy? Can he get his way into the lineup after redshirting? Dave Iuli, where does Dave kind of grow played a ton, 785 snaps at right guard, over 100 snaps at left guard. Gives you kind of some flexibility of where you want to put him. He really wasn't the best against the run, but he was also pretty good in pass block. But now it's, can you make him good in both?
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room is the two freshmen, the big time guys in Iheanacho and Tofi, who I just pulled up the best offensive line recruits Oregon's landed. This is number 1 and number 8 in school history. Are these guys ready to be contributors? Because if they are, and they're high-end players, I think this changes the conversation a little bit. And I don't expect both of them to be. And I don't know, I have a hard time expecting true freshmen to be offensive line starters, period. Like Penei Sewell was such a unique case, obviously, as somebody who's gone on to be arguably like the best offensive tackle in the NFL. It's a lot to ask, but maybe that is where some of this optimism comes from. Because I know, Matt, when you were down at the Orange Bowl, you spoke with Erik Terry, and you kind of relayed some of what Erik told me, but Erik was pretty fired up about what they have for 26. And I think both of us were not surprised, but kind of like, oh, okay, like that's reassuring, because the conversation we're having is the same one. I think a lot of people are kind of from afar looking at it going like, hey, they lose a lot of their better guys, and some of the players that are filling in are pretty unproven, but like, maybe share a little bit of some of that conversation you had with Erik, because I remember you kind of saying that, and I was like, okay, well, that makes me feel a little better that he has that confidence.
Yeah, he said that last year at this time, or around the new year going into the Rose Bowl, they felt like they really liked the potential in Crater and Janoris and a couple other guys on the roster, but they just felt like from a developmental piece, it would be more beneficial for one more year of work, and then trying to ask them to start and grow mid-season and development and whatnot, growing pains.
Yeah.
And so he said that's kind of what fueled the Isaiah World and the Harkey additions. And then when Pregnon became available, he said that was one in which we were looking at all the rosters across college football, and we were pegging guys as NFL portal, potential portal watch, whatever. They had him pegged as an NFL draft pick and kind of in the first round. And so he said when Pregnon went into the portal, they were like, wait a minute, this is a guy we thought was going to go pro. We have to go after him. And so that's how their pursuit of Pregnon happened. He said now transitioning towards this offseason that they're now in, he said our perspective on our guys that are younger in the program, or his words, was that they're more ready to play if called upon. And he would be totally content with those guys being your starters, being Janoris Wilson at right tackle, Fox Crater at left. He mentioned Trent Ferguson being a guy that's grown a lot, Douglas Utu's who's grown a lot. And he said now the need for the portal isn't there. Doesn't necessarily say never say never. We might go into the portal, which they ultimately have done.
Yep.
With Michael Bennett. They tried to go and get Jordan Seaton. I think Jordan Seaton would be along the lines of what Pregnon was, of this is just a guy that you have to take no matter who's coming back. But he was much more in line with the idea that these guys now are more ready, more prepared to play than they were a year ago. And that kind of dulled the sharpness of the need to go and get guys out there.
Here, I'll do a depth chart prediction and let you guys kind of let me know if it sounds right. And I'm going to make a switch here because something John said earlier was something I hadn't really considered, because Bennett had played right tackle exclusively at Yale. But if we assume he's sliding inside, does this make it sound a little better? If we say Crater's at left tackle, we say Iuli's at left guard. He played a little bit there. I'm just kind of moving these guys around and assuming Bennett's maybe better on the right side. Poncho at center, Bennett at right guard, Wilson at right tackle. Does that sound like a okay starting group? Because then behind you've got the Tofis, you've got the Iheanachos. I know Zaire Addison's a guy that they like. Trent Ferguson's a name. Douglas Utu. By the way, Devin Brooks is probably your backup center. That's a local kid who I think has been kind of working as one of their primary reserve centers the last couple of years. I don't know. That's kind of, I think, where my head's at. Does that, when I ran through that first line, John, what did you think? Did that excite you? Did that concern you? Kind of what was your just reaction to hearing what that might sound like?
I think the idea of Bennett sliding inside and just kind of having a guy with experience there at that guard spot instead of potentially pushing Douglas Utu to step up as a redshirt freshman would be better. I think the questions are all just it's the development of the tackles still. So I think that's where it is. And to Matt's point, I think you look at what they did in the transfer portal. Bennett wasn't really like highly regarded as a transfer. He was a guy that people saw, potentially moving into guard when he moved to a higher level of football. The fact that they weren't kind of going after those more like mid tier, the kind of the tier of prospects that Alex Harkey was last season, as a transfer portal guy. The opportunity was there with Jordan Seaton, but that's Jordan Seaton who's probably going to be a first round pick next year. That's why the teams were willing to go spend a couple $1 million to go get him as a left tackle. I think the fact that you weren't going after those guys a little bit behind Seaton on those transfer portal rankings is pretty telling that Terry has that confidence in Crater and Wilson to kind of develop and step up this next season.
They have 6 offensive linemen, quick math here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They have 6 offensive linemen that are inside the top 15 in program history of commits.
Yep.
I think when you phrase it in that manner, that opens the positive side of me a little bit. Now, the 2 highest guys are true freshmen. That's a little tough to lean into, but Douglas Utu is just outside the top 10. Dave Ayuli is 15th. A guy we've not mentioned yet, Zach Sosowski, is the 14th best offensive lineman they've ever signed. He's going to be a redshirt freshman next season. Zaire Addison is a redshirt freshman next year along the interior offensive line. He's just outside the top 12, or at the top 10 at number 12. So I think they've got a lot of young guys in this room, and it might be a case, maybe for the first time under the watch of Terry, and probably for a while, that the unit that starts the season might be different than the unit that ends the season, and it's not because of injury. It might be because guys simply just have adjusted to the game more and have played a little bit and have kind of grown into it. Kind of what we've seen at other positions where they kind of just rotated. They did it in the defensive backfield a ton this season until settling on kind of their core guys. Maybe we see the first couple weeks of the season, they mix and match a little bit more than normal just to kind of feel out who is where, and then it kind of sorts itself out mid-season.
It better sort itself out because I don't want the 2021. Was it 2021 with Mario where it was like musical chairs where every third series?
That was 2021 or 2020, one of the two.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm this is a really interesting group, and we've been doing this podcast. This is probably getting close to a record length, so let's wrap it here. I just wanted to do one kind of, let's take a step back and just kind of, how would we assess the hierarchy of all these position groups? And I apologize, I think the garbage guy is popping up over here. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but I think here's how I would go, and you guys can let me know if you disagree. I think quarterback you got to put at 1, just because Dante Moore has a chance to be the number 1 overall draft pick in the 2027 draft. I think you go Jordan Davison, and that running back room is number 2. I think you put receiver at 3. And I think receiver, running back, from a talent perspective, you could convince me to flip those because there's a little more depth at receiver than running back.
I was about to make the depth argument for receiver just over the running backs, just because I think with the running backs, it really is just that 1-2 where you have maybe even 7 guys who could play on this receiver room.
Yeah. So, maybe put a little T next to those and they're tied for second. And then there's a pretty good drop off to tight end where you love the elite guy, but there's real questions about depth. Like I kind of stand by that. The Jamari Johnson is here. You kind of don't know where number 2 is, and you don't necessarily know who number 2 is because no one's really played. And then offensive line, to me, is unquestioned at the very, very bottom of that group, and I think it's a pretty big gap. Does that feel right to you guys?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any pushback from me on that.
Okay, that was just where I was at. Sorry, I had to mute it because this guy is continuing to dump garbage outside my place. I apologize for bad audio, but I don't know. I think it's kind of fun to talk in those terms too, of like where the strengths and weaknesses. I think you feel really good about your quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and your tight end groups right now, and I think it's fair to be kind of uncertain about where the offensive line is. And that may totally change. We might get to the season and that feels like a strength. That wouldn't surprise me. That's been the case with the league before, but I think that's a fair way to kind of assess this right now.
Yeah, I think Oregon's skill positions can go just about like band for band with anybody in the country. Especially when you have the quarterback kind of like locking that down to centralize that. It's just a question of the trenches kind of coming together, like you said. Because on defense, you feel like the trenches are solidified with getting this whole defensive line back. But we know how obviously important that is to win it. And at the top levels of college football, you're going to need this offensive line to be able to move people in the run game.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to this one. Eric's right. We're almost at an hour and 15. It's a long one. We'll go defense next week at some point. Go to DuckTerritory.com for more coverage of Oregon's off-season work. Jackson Moore has been doing a great job covering recruiting. I encourage you guys to go check that out. Big weekend this weekend as well. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
See ya.